Ethiopia's new prime minister pledges to address grievances in his native Oromia region, reducing maternal mortality and childhood death in Cameroon, and breaking the disability stigma through art in Burkina Faso. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. In an effort to calm the violent unrest in his native Oromia region, Ethiopia's new prime minister has pledged to address grievances of the people in the region. Violence there has threatened the ruling coalition's hold on the East African nation. Abiy Ahmed was met by thousands of cheering locals when he arrived Wednesday in Ambo, a town at the heart of protests and clashes with security forces since 2015. The 42-year-old former army officer faces the challenge of lowering the anger of young members of his own Oromo ethnic group, Ethiopia's largest, who complain they are politically and economically marginalized. Demonstrations originally started in opposition to a development plan for Addis Ababa that critics said would take away land from farmers in Oromia province, which surrounds the capital. For more on the visit of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to the Oromia region, I'm joined in studio by VOA Horn of Africa reporter Solomon Abate. Solomon, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Vincent.
So typically a visit by Prime Minister to another part of the country is seen as a normal thing, but why is this very special in the case of Ethiopia?
Well, Vincent, Ambo, the town where the new prime minister traveled to yesterday, is very close to the capital. It is about 75 miles, about 120 kilometers west of Addis Ababa. And Ambo town has been a center of protest since EPRDF came to power, even before it came to power when it was closing into the capital. And it also has been a hot point, during the last 3 years. So it was significant to address the Oromo people and the Ethiopians as well, in general, for the new prime minister in order to push forward with his new plans, new idea. He has been advocating for tolerance and stronger Ethiopia, for unity, since he has emerged as a new political leader. So Ambo was significant for him.
Significant. And also the fact that for all those years, no leader from Addis Ababa seemed to be willing to visit there. Did he do this because he originates from there, or is this giving hope that he has a totally different approach and perspective of things?
He did not originate from Ambo. He originated far western.
Yeah, but in the Oromia region, that's what I'm saying.
He came from Oromia region, but he made his first visit to Somali region last week, to the capital of the Ethiopian Somali region, Jigjiga, and he traveled there with his senior officials, including his deputy, the deputy prime minister, and he talked to the elders, the political leaders, community leaders there, and he called upon the Somali people and the Oromo people and all Ethiopians, to forget, whatever resentment they had in the past, the bitterness.
But let's face it, what are the major challenges in trying to resolve, especially the conflict between the people of the Oromia region and the government in Addis Ababa? What are the main issues here?
Well, it started, as you mentioned in your video piece earlier, it started with a problem that happened around the suburbs of the Addis Ababa, the capital city.
The taking away of some of the land for development of Addis.
Yeah, that was the starting point of, the protests, especially the latest protests in the last 3 years. But now that protest grew to a bigger political demands. You know, there have been a lot happened, you know, in Oromia region. A lot of people were arrested, you know, and killed. Protesters, civilians were killed in that region. And, you know, the situation grew bitter and bitter, you know, from day to day, you know. So now the demand became, you know, the release of all political prisoners, the free elections and free electoral commission.
That this is just the beginning and perhaps a gesture, but the issues will take a little time to resolve.
I think so. Yeah. It will take some time because, you know, it is a new leader with an old political party. And the political party... the political party has not changed. So only time will prove whether he is that influential within the party, or perhaps the party will overwhelm all his good intentions. And probably we'll call you back here to tell us a little more later. Thank you very much, Solomon, for joining us today. Thank you for inviting me.
Appreciate it very much. Well, that's VOA Horn of Africa reporter Solomon Abate. Now, thousands of African migrants in Israel remain in limbo after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu scrapped a deal with the United Nations Refugee Agency to resettle about half of the migrants in the West and allow thousands of others to remain in Israel. Netanyahu backed out of the agreement after facing backlash from his right-wing political power base over the offer of Israeli residency. Legislators and human rights groups say Israel is now seeking to deport the migrants to Uganda. There are about 37,000 African migrants in Israel today, most of them Eritreans and many from Sudan. They crossed into Israel on foot from Egypt illegally over the past decade and were granted temporary visas. The migrants and those advocating on their behalf say they are asylum seekers fleeing war and persecution.
The Hotline for Refugees and Migrants, as well as other human rights organizations, have sent missions to inquire about the fates of those who have been already deported to Uganda and Rwanda. We know for a fact that the fates of those people are very harsh. We know for a fact that Uganda and Rwanda did not live up to the expectations, to their agreements, that they did not deliver a safe status for people to live there, and eventually, subsequently, people were pushed out of those countries to seek refuge elsewhere, including in Europe, including some have reached Libya and the torture camps there. Very devastating fates.
Well, many migrants live in cramped apartments in poor parts of Tel Aviv, where eateries serve Eritrean food and clothing stores display traditional garb. Zimbabwe is inviting Western powers to monitor its national elections for the first time in more than 15 years, ending a ban imposed by former leader Robert Mugabe. The permanent secretary at the Foreign Ministry says the invitations will be sent out soon, but declined to give more details. The vote scheduled for July is seen as a major test for President Emmerson Mnangagwa's democratic credentials since he came to power in November after a de facto army coup ousted the 94-year-old Mugabe. Zimbabwe will invite the United States, the European Union and Australia, among 46 countries and 15 organizations. Now, the countries and groups on the list were all previously banned from watching elections in 2002 after Mugabe accused them of favoring his opponents. Now, the Africa 54 team is always thrilled when you reach out to us on social media and let us know what you think about us and the stories we cover. We recently asked on our social media channels, what are the challenges girls face in Africa? And we received a lot of comments. Donatha Gihana from Kigali in Rwanda sent me a tweet that says, I strongly believe that adolescent girls are the future women leaders, but they face numerous challenges. It is our duty to find sustainable solutions and actively engage them in the process. Now, a few of our loyal viewers made suggestions of the kind of stories they would like to see on Africa 54. Abdullahi Muhammad Abdi from Uganda wrote, introduce stories about the development of Africa. We have to boost our identity in order to advance. Well, we do include stories and in-depth interviews about development and innovation in different African countries. We also got a great comment from Arsenio Hope Harris from Liberia, who writes, I think Africa 54 is not biased like most news networks, but more needs to be done for the outside world to understand that the news in Africa is not always negative. You're right, Asenio. There are great things happening in Africa, not only tragedies. We do include stories like that on our show. Just keep watching Africa 54. So I want to thank you very much for your comments and keep them coming. Reach out to us on Facebook at voaafrica.com, and don't forget, we stream our show live on every day. Now follow me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Well, coming up, reducing maternal mortality and childhood death in Cameroon. Stay with us.
This is a country that I chose to become a citizen. I didn't have to become a citizen. I chose to become a citizen.
I feel like America gave me an opportunity to pursue my passion as an artist.
I really believe that clean eating is a way to a more successful life, or a happier life, if you want to put it that way.
One of the things that helps me wake up every morning is doing better, being better.
We grew up poor, and so I'm always focused on helping the working class be able to have a more comfortable lifestyle.
I'm passionate about doing justice every day. I oftentimes say that justice is a verb, not a noun. You know, I believe in action and moving the ball forward.
But most South Africans are mourning anti-apartheid icon Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Her death last week at the age of 81 after a long illness was met by an outpouring of emotions across the nation. Madikizela Mandela has been called fearless and relentless, but her uncompromising methods in the long struggle against white rule and refusal to forgive contrasted sharply with the reconciliation espoused by her husband, Nelson Mandela, who worked to forge a pluralistic democracy out of the brutal racial divide and oppression of apartheid. She will be buried in Johannesburg on Saturday after almost 2 weeks of mourning. Now, for many South Africans, Madikizela Mandela is a hero and a mother of the nation. To her critics, Madikizela Mandela was a divisive figure and even a bully. But who was she to women across Africa? For some perspective, I'm joined in studio by Amira Woods of the International Working Group, African Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. Welcome.
An honor to be here with you, Vincent.
Yeah. Now, of course, I'm sure you have also been touched by the death of Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Personally, to you, what did she mean?
Well, Mama Winnie was an icon. She was a bold, fearless, courageous woman leader. For me, she took up a mantle of many other dynamic African women leaders who fought against slavery, who fought against colonialism. Well, Mama Winnie, she was the courageous leader for many of us who stood up against white rule in South Africa, stood up against a machinery of violent repression that really tried to break a people. And she stood as an example of a powerful woman standing with dignity, fighting for justice, inspiring us all, not only in South Africa and across the continent, but really around the world.
Mm-hmm. So when you look across the continent of Africa, can you compare her with any other women, or did she inspire particular women on the continent that you can remember?
I think she continues to inspire, even now that she's passed. You know, she's gone to join the ancestors, but she stands as an inspiration to leaders across the continent that are visioning a stronger, a better Africa, that are visioning an Africa where, you know, the resources of the continent feed the children of the continent, meet the needs of the people of the continent. I think she fought for those values, those principles enshrined in the ANC's Freedom Charter that spoke for resources actually being fairly distributed, you know, in an economy that works for all. I think she spoke for many who fight for, particularly now in the age of climate catastrophe facing the entire continent, who fight for upholding some of our traditional practices to preserve the land, to preserve the vitality of the people. And so she continues to inspire.
We have lived at a time of the decades where people have been speaking about, so, you know, the society should give women the opportunities to lead. They should actually create opportunities for women. But Winnie Mandela was operating under the most difficult circumstances, and her husband was in prison. She was herself being brutalized every day, yet she stood up and fought against the system. What do you think are the lessons the other women or women across Africa could pick out from Winnie Mandela?
I think it's important to remember that Winnie Mandela started out, even before she met and married Nelson Mandela, she was a thinker, but also a social worker, right? So she went to school in spite of all the horrors of apartheid. She fought for her education, and also she fought for children, right? She was a social worker that was interested in the dignity, the value, the lives of children at the community level. So, you know, rooted in community and also integrally connected to movements. I think, you know, understanding that Winnie Mandela was so a part of a people's movement led by young people throughout South Africa demanding an end to apartheid. So she was almost the voice of the movement for quite some time. And I think even till today stands as a model of how servant leadership should function, where people put the interests of their people first.
But at the same time, there are those who say she was less than perfect. She did a few things that did not endear her to some people in South Africa and even across the world.
Well, I think we have to remember the times, you know, the horrors of apartheid, the violence that was wrought. Remember, this was a time when people were receiving packages with bombs in them, in their mailboxes, right? Where people had to be forced into exile for their own survival. So I think we have to remember how draconian the apartheid regime was and how ruthless it was in its determination to put down a people. And so I think what we see is a courageous woman who stood firm against white rule, who stood firm for the interests of her people, and who fought for those interests regardless of the machinery she was fighting against.
Do you think she's judged differently and sometimes a little bit more harshly because she was a woman, as opposed to if it was a man in the same position?
Oh, I think we have to also say who's doing the judging. I think we have to look at some of the international media after her passing and see all of this kind of, you know, retelling of history almost, right? And I think what you see, though, particularly from women across the continent and across the world, is an understanding that the bold, fearless, courageous leader of Winnie Mandela is an icon that we will hold up, you know, and will continue to be inspired by for generations to come.
Well, I really appreciate your assessment of Winnie Mandela and sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you.
That's Emiro Woods is with the International Working Group, African Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity. Well, it's time for a health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with interesting details on the Color of Roses Foundation. Lino.
Hello, Vincent. Well, as the world aims to attain the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, in 2030, observers say Africa will have to step up its efforts to meet targets such as reducing maternal mortality and childhood death. According to UNICEF, Cameroon ranked 18th among the 20 countries in the world with the highest mortality for children under 5, and maternal mortality is alarmingly high. The Colors of Roses Foundation aims to address some of the challenges. The founder and president, Sylvia Dassi, explains.
So we focus on maternal mortality, and we said we're going to contribute in reducing maternal mortality for Cameroon. So by the end of 2030, we see that there is a progress. How did we want to achieve that goal? We came up with 4 objectives, and the 4 objectives was: 1, to provide culturally competent education to increase awareness of the importance of antenatal care within the community. 2 was to provide vitamin supplementation programs for mothers and children. So we're focusing on maternal and infant mortality to reduce it. And 3 was to provide resources to strengthen antenatal care. And 4 was to identify partners that we could work with to extend that services to our population. So in 2016, when we went to Cameroon to actually begin the implementation projects of our services. Colors of Roses Foundation was blessed to become a partner with Vitamin Angels, a field partner with Vitamin Angels. You know, Vitamin Angels provide life-saving vitamins for pregnant women, prenatal vitamins for pregnant women. They also provide vitamin A and deworming for children.
Let's talk about the health services where you reach out to communities, especially women and children, to improve their health, distributing vitamins. So tell us how all of this came about.
So when we looked at maternal mortality from 2000, the trends in maternal mortality from 1990 to 2015, we looked at Cameroon, and we realized that the progress was not met at the end of the Millennium Development Goals. Yes, the progress was not met. So moving forward into the Sustainable Development Goals, the world is calling on reducing maternal mortality 70 per 100,000 lives spread. So we said, okay, we are going to identify this because women play a vital role in the community. But most importantly, pregnancy is one of the most vulnerable periods, within a woman's life. And when there is maternal mortality, that also has a ripple effect when it comes to development. If a woman dies, even if it's her first pregnancy or it's a second pregnancy, she leaves behind a community.
Tell us about some of the impact that you've seen.
We started small. Now we have expanded in 2 geographic regions in Cameroon, 2 health districts in Cameroon. And within the 2 health districts, we have expanded to about 20 zones, health zones. And some of the impacts that we are seeing so far is we've been able to track women, pregnant women who have benefited from the vitamin. Is that one, the components of the vitamin, you have folic acid, you have iron, you have vitamin A. Women, based on their lab work, when they go for antenatals, those that had low blood count, their blood count is now back up, is back to normal. During pregnancy, especially during the first trimester and the second trimester, there's a lot of, appetite issues. Women are beginning to gain their appetite. So, but most importantly, we are fighting against low birth weight. We are fighting against, complications during pregnancy. We, through the vitamins, we hope to improve, the immune system of the mother when they're taking these vitamins. We are fighting against premature birth. Given that is being distributed to the women for free, it has also helped them.
What do you see as other issues that really need to be tackled?
Well, when it comes to factors that contribute to maternal and infant death, some well-established factors has been hypertension, postpartum hemorrhage, you have birth defects for children, complications during pregnancy, sudden infant death syndrome, and even more. But these are factors that are common worldwide. But in Cameroon, for the past 2 years that we've been working, we have identified that poverty, especially in rural regions, transportation and access to health care. For children, one thing that we noticed was lack of neonatal intensive care units. That's for preterm babies. So in the future, what we are working on, or what we intend to work on, is to work with the government to see how we can open up a NICU facility or a NICU clinic in one of the rural regions in which we are working in right now in Cameroon to bridge that gap. We identify needs based on the demand and a specific time within the country. And the population, we talk to the population, what are your challenges? Because they live in that community, they understand the challenges, that they face. And by working with the population, we identify those challenges and we work together to bring sustainable solutions.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @LenorMoudou. Vincent, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Lenore. Now be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. It is time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, shattering disability stereotypes in Burkina Faso. We'll be right back.
Supporters of Ibrahim Zakzaki, the leader of the Islamic movement of Nigeria, protest to demand his release after nearly 2 years in custody. In Ethiopia, new prime minister asked protesters for patience as he works to make the country more inclusive for the Oromo people, the largest ethnic group. In Togo, opposition protesters clashed with police on Wednesday in the capital Lomé, calling for President Faure Gnassingbé's resignation and election reform. In Algeria, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika declares 3 days of national mourning after a military plane crashed on Wednesday, killing nearly 300 people. In Burkina Faso's second biggest city, Bobo Dioulasso, educators are using theater and dance to teach sign language to children.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. No land? No problem. You can build your home over someone else's car park. That's the theory behind the Z-Pod, the house that needs no land or foundations. The Z-Pod can be built on stilts over a standard-sized parking bay, intended as a first home for young people. The structure is delivered to site and erected within 24 hours. According to the Z-Pod's inventors, decoupling the cost of land and building makes development space available where people want to live. The super-insulated house generates 80% of its expected energy needs and can be rented for less than the cost of a normal single room in a shared house in London. Well, next up, the world's first long-distance electric bus line has been inaugurated in Paris. The FlexiBus service links the French capital to the northern city of Amiens, a 160 kilometers journey, which will take a little over 2 hours. The bus, which seats 49, has all the advantages of an electric vehicle: zero emissions, quiet, and drives more smoothly than its fuel-powered counterpart. With a maximum range of 250 kilometers, the batteries can be fully charged in 5 hours, or even just 2 with the use of a supercharger. FlexiBus hopes to open more 100% electric lines in the future in France and across Europe. Well, and finally, a new project in Burkina Faso is helping to fight a disability stigma amongst young people through performance art. Known as Nosandia, meaning joy in the local Bambara language, the project teaches sign language, theater, and dance to help deaf and mute children to interact with other children that have hearing ability. The students recently got a chance to showcase their skills by staging plays that also raised awareness about various disabilities. In Burkina Faso, people with disabilities are often seen as a burden to society and stigmatized by their families and the wider community. Following the successful launch of the project, organizers say they are hoping to expand around the country, and that's what's trending. Well, and that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a good night.